What if the stories we tell about heroes aren't just tales of the past, but living threads woven into the very fabric of who we are? Across continents and centuries, myths of legendary heroes have ignited imaginations, shaped civilizations, and whispered timeless truths about courage, sacrifice, and the human spirit. These aren't just bedtime stories, they're echoes of our deepest fears, highest hopes, and the unshakable belief that even in the darkest times, someone extraordinary can rise. And today, we're setting out on a journey to uncover 30 of these timeless myths, each one a doorway into a world where the impossible becomes real and legends walk among us. Picture the crackling firelight of an ancient storyteller's circle, where voices rise and fall with tales of gods walking the earth, warriors defying death, and mortals whose deeds carved their names into eternity. These stories didn't just entertain, they defined cultures, inspired rulers, and even changed the course of history. From the thunderous battles of Hercules to the cunning of Anansi the spider, these heroes aren't confined to dusty scrolls or forgotten ruins. They live on in the way we measure bravery, the way we face adversity, and the way we dream of something greater than ourselves. But what if there's more to these legends than meets the eye? Behind every myth lies a kernel of truth, a real person, a seismic event, or a universal struggle that transcended time. Were the heroes of these stories flesh and blood figures, their deeds magnified by generations of retelling? Or are they pure symbol, crafted to teach us how to navigate a world full of chaos and wonder? Over the next 30 stories, we'll peel back the layers of history and myth, separating fact from folklore, and discovering why these tales still resonate so powerfully today. This isn't just a recounting of adventures, it's an excavation of the human soul. So sit back and let's step into the shadows where history and legend collide, where every story holds a secret waiting to be uncovered. Hercules wasn't born a hero, he was made one through fire, suffering, and impossible choices. The son of Zeus and a mortal woman, his very existence was a provocation, a half-god destined for greatness but cursed with the wrath of Hera. Her fury drove him to madness, a moment of blind rage where he slaughtered his own family. And from that unthinkable tragedy came his penance, 12 labors, each more harrowing than the last. These weren't just tasks, they were a gauntlet of redemption, a path to cleanse his soul and prove that even the most broken among us can rise. Take the Hydra, that many-headed serpent lurking in the swamps of Lerna. Every time Hercules struck off one head, 2 more grew in its place, a nightmare that mirrored life's cruelest truth. Some struggles multiply when you fight them. But here's the twist. Hercules didn't win through brute force alone, he adapted. With his nephew Iolaus by his side, they seared each severed neck with fire, stopping the regrowth. The lesson: even divine strength needs strategy, and even the mightiest heroes rely on others. Then there's the golden hind, a deer so swift it could outrun arrows, its hooves never touching the ground. Capturing it alive wasn't about conquest, it was about patience, reverence. For a year, Hercules tracked it, learning its rhythms, respecting its sacredness. In the end, he didn't break it, he honored it. That's the hidden depth of these labors. They weren't just tests of might, but of character, cleaning the Orjon stables in a single day. A metaphor for tackling the impossible messes of life, stealing the girdle of the Amazon queen Hippolyta, a challenge to navigate power and diplomacy. Hercules' story endures because it's not about perfection. It's about stumbling, enduring, and finding strength in the struggle. His labors are a mirror. The Hydra's heads are our recurring demons, the golden hind our elusive dreams. And in the end, his apotheosis, the moment he ascends to Olympus, isn't a reward for victory, but for perseverance. That's the heart of the myth. Not how many monsters he slew, but how many times he got back up. Hercules didn't just vanish into the mists of myth, his legacy became a blueprint for heroes across ages and cultures. When he finally ascended to Olympus, his apotheosis wasn't just a personal triumph, it was a promise. A promise that even those stained by tragedy could transcend their past, that suffering could forge not just strength but divinity. This idea echoed through generations, shaping heroes from Perseus to Superman. You can see it in their stories: the orphaned outsider, the burden of power, the quest for redemption. Hercules' DNA is woven into their very bones, but his influence didn't stop at storytelling. The Romans, masters of political theater, turned Hercules into a propaganda powerhouse. Emperors like Commodus claimed direct lineage from him, staging gladiatorial spectacles where they'd reenact his labors, clad in lion skins, hammering home the message: I am the heir of Hercules, and therefore I am destined to rule. Even his club, once a tool for smashing monsters, became a symbol of imperial authority. It's a stark reminder that myths are never just stories, they're tools, weapons, mirrors held up to the ambitions of those who wield them. Fast forward to modern times, and Hercules is everywhere, yet rarely the same twice. Disney's animated version gave us a hero who was more awkward teen than tormented demigod, his struggles sanitized for younger audiences. Marvel Comics, though, leaned into the darker edges, portraying him as a brash, flawed warrior whose arrogance often outpaced his strength. And then there's the Hercules film with Dwayne Johnson, where the myth becomes a playground for spectacle, blurring the line between legend and con artistry. Each retelling refracts the myth through a different lens, asking the same question: what does it mean to be a hero today? Perhaps that's why Hercules endures. His story is clay, molded to fit the fears and desires of every era. Whether he's a symbol of imperial might, a cartoon singing about zeros to heroes, or a brooding comic book antihero, he remains a mirror. And in that mirror, we don't just see him, we see ourselves, wrestling with our own hydras, chasing our own golden hinds, desperate to believe that our labors, too, might lead us somewhere divine. Odysseus didn't conquer his trials with brute strength, he outthought them. The man who devised the Trojan horse, that masterstroke of deception, faced a far crueler test after the war, a 10-year voyage home where every wave seemed determined to break him. His journey wasn't just a physical ordeal, it was a gauntlet of the mind, a chess match against gods and monsters where a single misstep meant oblivion. And nowhere was his cunning more vital than in the cave of Polyphemus, the Cyclops. Trapped with his men, watching his crew get devoured two at a time, Odysseus didn't panic. He plotted, offering the monster wine until it passed out, then driving a heated stake into its single eye. That was the easy part, the genius came after. When Polyphemus screamed for help, asking which nobody had blinded him, Odysseus had already rigged the game. No one came to the Cyclops' aid because nobody had hurt him. It was wordplay as survival tactic, a reminder that sometimes the sharpest weapon is the tongue. Then came the sirens, those haunting voices promising knowledge no mortal could resist. But Odysseus had spent years learning the cost of curiosity. Instead of relying on willpower alone, a doomed strategy, he ordered his crew to plug their ears with wax and tie him to the mast. He knew human nature well enough to distrust even his own. That moment captures the heart of his myth. Brilliance isn't just about solving problems, but anticipating your own weaknesses. And what of Penelope, weaving and unweaving her shroud to stall her suitors? While Odysseus navigated monsters, she waged her own war of attrition, her loom a silent battlefield. Their reunion wasn't just romantic, it was a testament to matched wits. When he finally returned disguised as a beggar, she tested him with the secret of their bed carved from a living olive tree. Only then did she embrace him, proving loyalty isn't blind faith, but a dance of mutual recognition. The Odyssey endures because it's not about the destination, it's about what the journey strips away. Odysseus starts as a conqueror but returns as something rarer, a man who's learned the limits of control. The Cyclops teaches him humility, the sirens the price of temptation, and Penelope the art of patience. His greatest victory wasn't escaping Poseidon's wrath. It was realizing that true cunning isn't just cleverness, it's knowing when to listen, when to bend, and when to let the tide carry you home. The Odyssey didn't just fade into ancient scrolls, it became a cultural blueprint, seeping into art, literature, and even the way we frame modern storytelling. Take James Joyce's Ulysses, a novel that transplants Odysseus' decade-long struggle into a single day in Dublin. Leopold Bloom, Joyce's everyman hero, isn't wrestling cyclops or outwitting sirens. He's navigating the mundane monsters of urban life, gossip, prejudice, and his own insecurities. Yet the parallels are unmistakable. Bloom's encounters mirror Odysseus' trials, from the Circe-like brothel keeper to the taunting Cyclops of nationalist rhetoric. Joyce didn't just borrow the structure, he proved that the epic's core, the longing for home, the tension between wit and wrath, was timeless, adaptable to any era's battles. Hollywood, too, couldn't resist the Odyssey's pull. Films like Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Dressed the myth in Depression-era overalls, turning Odysseus into a silver-tongued convict escaping a chain gang. The sirens here aren't birdwomen but baptizing singers luring men into complacency, while the Cyclops is a one-eyed Bible salesman with a violent streak. Each adaptation strips the tale to its bones, then clothes it in new flesh, proving that Odysseus' journey isn't about geography. It's about the human instinct to persevere, no matter the century or costume. But perhaps the most profound legacy is how Homer's epic birthed the hero's journey archetype. Joseph Campbell's The Hero with 1,000 Faces traced the Odyssey's DNA in myths worldwide, crystallizing the pattern, a call to adventure, trials, transformation, and return. Star Wars' Luke Skywalker, a spacefaring Odysseus mentored by a wise old seer instead of Athena. The Matrix's Neo, a digital age wanderer battling illusion like Odysseus resisting the Lotus Eaters. These stories resonate because they tap into the same primal rhythm, the idea that growth demands displacement, that wisdom is earned through wandering. Yet the Odyssey's real power lies in its flexibility. It's not a rigid formula but a set of themes: homecoming, identity, the cost of pride, that echo differently across cultures. In West African Griot traditions, the Sundiata epic mirrors Odysseus' return from exile to reclaim his throne. In Bollywood, films like Swads reframe the hero's journey as a return to roots, blending Homer's nostalgia with modern nationalism. The Odyssey endures because it's not a story to copy, but a lens to reinterpret, proving that the greatest myths aren't locked in the past, they're alive, breathing through every new voice that dares to ask, what does it mean to find your way home? A sword in a stone isn't just a weapon, it's a test of character. Young Arthur, the overlooked squire with no noble blood, pulls Excalibur free not because he's the strongest, but because he's the only one who doesn't crave power for its own sake. That moment crystallizes the myth's heart. True leadership isn't inherited, it's earned through humility. The legend spins this into magic, a blade forged by the Lady of the Lake, shimmering with destiny. But strip away the enchantment and you're left with something more radical. In a world where kings were crowned by birthright, Arthur's story whispers that legitimacy comes from something deeper than lineage. Yet Arthur's reign was never just about the sword. Camelot, his shining city on the hill, became shorthand for an impossible ideal: justice without corruption, might tempered by mercy, a brotherhood bound by shared purpose. The Round Table with no head seat was a revolution carved in wood. Here, every knight's voice carried equal weight. Lancelot's betrayal and Mordred's uprising didn't just topple a kingdom, they exposed the fragility of utopia. The genius of the myth lies in its bittersweet collapse. Camelot had to fall because perfection isn't sustainable, only the striving for it is. But was Arthur more than myth? Historians wade through murky waters. Some tie him to 5th-century warlords like Ambrosius Aurelianus fighting Saxon invaders. others see echoes in the Welsh hero Owain D. Dantgwyn, whose name means white tooth, a possible root for Pendragon. The ruins at Tintagel, a wind-swept Cornish fortress, whisper of a real stronghold, but archaeology offers no smoking sword. What's fascinating isn't the lack of evidence, but our refusal to let go of the search. We want Arthur to have walked the misty hills of post-Roman Britain because his story stitches together our longing for a golden age. Excalibur's legacy cuts deeper than medieval romance. It's embedded in our political rhetoric. Camelot, invoked for Kennedy's presidency, the sword a symbol of moral authority in everything from courtroom statues to fantasy epics. Tolkien's Aragorn wields Anduril, a reforged blade of kings channeling Arthur's mantle. Even modern sci-fi leans into the trope, with lightsabers echoing Excalibur's glow as a beacon of rightful leadership. The sword isn't just a tool, it's a contract. Whoever wields it inherits the burden to rule justly or be consumed by their own ambition. Arthur's end, wounded, ferried to Avalon, leaves him suspended between death and legend. The once and future king implies a return, a promise that ideals outlast their champions. That's why we revisit him in every generation, from Tennyson's melancholic Idyls of the King to Netflix's gritty Curse. Each retelling asks the same question: can flawed humans build a better world, or are we doomed to repeat the fall? The answer might lie in the myth's quietest lesson. Arthur's greatest act wasn't pulling the sword, it was knowing when to let go. Lancelot was Camelot's greatest knight and its greatest failure. Cloaked in unmatched skill and noble bearing, he embodied chivalry's ideal until his love for Guinevere unraveled it all. Their affair wasn't just a betrayal, it exposed the lie at the heart of Camelot's perfection. Even the purest knight, the paragon of virtue, could falter when desire clashed with duty. Medieval troubadours spun this tension into courtly romance, where love was both a spiritual quest and a destructive force. But Lancelot's tragedy runs deeper. His final duel with Arthur, fought with tears streaming beneath their helmets, wasn't about victory, it was the moment both men realized ideals could break as easily as swords. Then there's Gawain, the knight who wore his flaws openly. Where Lancelot's sin was hidden, Gawain's came with a green sash and a brutal lesson. In Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, he accepts a challenge from a mysterious stranger, agreeing to a blow now, and one returned in a year. When the time comes, Gawain flinches, earning only a nick on his neck but a gash to his pride. The story's genius lies in its humanity. Gawain isn't punished for failing, he's revered for admitting it. Chivalry here isn't about invincibility, it's about honesty in the face of fear. The Holy Grail quest strips the knights bare. Unlike earthly battles, this journey couldn't be won with strength or strategy. Only Galahad, the purest of heart, could glimpse the Grail, a symbol that true divinity demands surrender, not conquest. The others returned haunted, their failures etched into their armor. Percival's hesitation, Bor's moral compromises, each misstep revealed how far even the noblest fell short of grace. The Grail wasn't just a relic, it was a mirror, reflecting the impossible standard of perfection Camelot itself could never sustain. Arthurian legends didn't just entertain medieval courts, they codified chivalry's contradictions. On one hand, knights swore oaths to protect the weak, like Gareth defending the abused Lady Lynette. On the other, their violence was glorified, their wars draped in sanctimony. The Round Table's brilliance was its illusion of equality, yet Arthur remained primus inter pares, first among equals. This tension shaped real-world knighthood, from Charlemagne's paladins to the Crusades' warrior monks. Even today, when we speak of chivalrous behavior, we're invoking Arthur's ghost, forever balancing honor against human frailty. Modern retellings can't resist twisting these archetypes. In The Once and Future King, Lancelot is tormented by self-loathing, his love for Guinevere as much a curse as a passion. Monty Python and the Holy Grail mocks the Grail quest's absurdity, yet beneath the satire lurks a truth. the pursuit of meaning often feels like chasing shadows. And in BBC's Merlin, Camelot's golden age is tinged with foreboding, its heroes flawed long before their fall. These adaptations prove the legend's power lies not in their idealism, but in their aching humanity, the understanding that even the brightest lights cast the darkest shadows. The Round Table's legacy isn't in its victories, but in how its knights faced defeat. Lancelot's love, Gawain's shame, Galahad's purity, these aren't medieval footnotes. They're reminders that heroism isn't about stainless steel or spotless reputations. It's about striving, failing, and still riding out each dawn with your head high, your sword sharp, and your heart heavier than the armor you wear. Camelot fell, but its paradox endures. The noblest pursuits often leave the deepest scars. Beowulf didn't hunt monsters for glory, he fought them because the world demanded it. When the demon Grendel slaughtered warriors in Heorot Hall, leaving the mead-soaked floor slick with blood, Beowulf didn't flinch. He waited in the dark, bare-handed, because true courage meant meeting the enemy on equal terms. No armor, no sword, just flesh against claw. The battle wasn't just physical, it was a clash of philosophies. Grendel, the shadow stalker, represented chaos, the untamed terror lurking beyond the firelight. Beowulf's victory wasn't just over a monster, but over the fear that paralyzed a kingdom. His grip tore Grendel's arm from its socket, a visceral symbol of order wrenching back control from the abyss. But Grendel's mother proved an even deadlier foe. Where her son was brute force, she was cunning, a creature of the fen who dragged Beowulf into her watery lair, a realm where human strength faltered. Here, the poem's pagan roots run deep. The Mere's depths echo Norse mythology's 9 worlds, a liminal space where heroes are tested not just in body but in spirit. Beowulf's borrowed sword, Hrunting, fails him, a reminder that mortal tools are fleeting. Salvation comes from a giant forged blade among her horde, a weapon older than kingdoms. His triumph is tinged with fate, the sense that some victories are written before the first blow is struck. The dragon, decades later, is different. An aged Beowulf, now a king, faces this fireworm not for fame but duty. His people's homes burn, and though he knows the prophecy that this fight will kill him, he charges in anyway. This is the Anglo-Saxon ideal of weird, the inescapable weave of fate, met not with resignation but defiance. The dragon isn't just a beast, it's time itself gnawing at the edges of legacy. Beowulf's death scene, surrounded by plundered gold, is heartbreaking. He commands his thane, Wiglaf, to bring him the treasure so he can see it one last time, not out of greed, but to confirm his life's work wasn't wasted. The hoard is buried with him, a futile attempt to buy immortality with gold, yet his true monument is the lesson he leaves: kings must bleed for their people. Beneath these battles thrums the poem's dual heartbeat, pagan fatalism and Christian hope. Grendel is called a descendant of Cain, his violence a biblical curse. Yet the Danes seek no priests, they offer sacrifices to old gods at stone idols. Beowulf thanks the Almighty for victory, but his world is one where glory is sung in mead halls, not churches. This tension mirrors the era itself, when England's conversion was still fresh, its heroes caught between weird and providence. The poet, likely a Christian scribe, preserves the pagan ethos while stitching in moral threads Grendel's envy, the dragon's greed, as if to say, even monsters are mirrors. Modern renditions strip these layers at their peril. The Zemeckis film turns Beowulf into a swaggering braggart, his fights spectacle without subtext. Tolkien's scholarship, though, unlocks the poem's depth, his Beowulf. The monsters and the critics argues that the creatures aren't distractions, but the point. They externalize existential threats. Grendel is otherness, the dragon mortality. Even Game of Thrones borrows this language, with Jon Snow as a Beowulf figure standing against the night. What endures isn't the gore, but the quiet moments: Beowulf kneeling before Hrothgar or Wiglaf cradling his dying king. The monsters fall, but the questions remain: can courage outlast time? Can honor survive fire? The poem's answer is written in blood and smoke, a whisper across 12 centuries that still burns. Tolkien didn't just study Beowulf, he breathed new life into it. Long before The Lord of the Rings, his groundbreaking essay Beowulf, the monsters and the critics shattered the notion that the poem was mere primitive spectacle. He argued that Grendel, his mother, and the dragon weren't distractions from the real history, they were the history. These monsters, he insisted, embodied the existential threats haunting the Anglo-Saxon psyche, the terror of the unknown, the vengeance of nature, the inevitability of death. Tolkien's own Middle-earth echoes this vision. Smaug's horde mirrors Beowulf's dragon, while Gollum's eerie whispers recall Grendel's cursed lineage. Even the Rohirrim's Mead Hall culture feels lifted straight from Heorot, proving that the oldest stories never die, they shapeshift. The 2007 film adaptation took a different path, swapping the epic's solemn grandeur for slick, motion-captured spectacle. Angelina Jolie's golden Grendel's mother became a seductive temptress, twisting the original's monstrous matriarch into a figure of Freudian nightmare. The movie's Beowulf, voiced by Ray Winstone, boasted and preened, his heroism tinged with vanity, a far cry from the poem's stoic warrior. Yet for all its liberties, the film tapped into something primal. The dragon's attack, with its raining fire and collapsing timbers, visualized the apocalyptic tone the Old English text only hints at. Sometimes adaptation isn't about fidelity, it's about mining the myth for new fears. Modern fantasy owes Beowulf its DNA. Game of Thrones' White Walkers, with their otherworldly menace, channel Grendel's remorseless slaughter. The Witcher's Geralt, a monster hunter navigating moral gray zones, mirrors Beowulf's duality, both king and killer. Even Marvel's Thor, with his Mead Hall bravado and doomed battles, carries the scent of Norse epic. What these stories share is the poem's central question. How do you hold the line against darkness when the cost is your own humanity? But the most fascinating adaptations aren't on screen, they're in living history. For centuries, Beowulf survived through oral tradition, recited by firelight by Scops who tweaked each telling. That legacy continues in spoken-word performances today, where voice artists resurrect the original Old English, its guttural rhythms rolling like waves against a longship's hull. Hearing H-Wheat, the poem's thunderous opener, is a reminder that Beowulf was never meant to be silent on a page. It's a roar across time, demanding to be heard anew. Academics still spar over its secrets. Is it a Christian allegory or a pagan relic, a political parable or a funeral dirge? The truth might be simpler and more profound. Beowulf endures because it's a mirror held up to our own monsters. The chaos we battle, the legacies we burnish, the mortality we rage against. Every adaptation, from Tolkien's scholarly defense to Zemeckis' CGI frenzy, is another scratch on that mirror's edge, distorting, yes, but never dulling its reflection. After all, what are modern heroes but Beowulf's heirs, still gripping their swords in the dark, waiting for the next Grendel to come knocking? Gilgamesh wasn't just a king, he was a force of nature, 2/3 god and 1/3 man, ruling Uruk with unchecked arrogance until the gods sent Enkidu to humble him. Their clash was seismic, a battle of titans that shook the city walls, but from the dust emerged something unexpected. Friendship. Enkidu, the wild man molded from clay, became Gilgamesh's mirror, showing him the cost of his tyranny. Together, they slay the demon Humbaba and defy the gods by butchering the bull of heaven, but their defiance comes at a price. Enkidu falls sick, cursed by divine wrath, and dies in Gilgamesh's arms, a moment so visceral it cracks the king's invincibility. Watching his friend's body stiffen with rigor mortis, Gilgamesh does something unprecedented. He weeps, not just for Enkidu, but for himself, realizing for the first time that death comes for everyone, even those who walk like gods. This triggers his most desperate quest, not for glory, but for escape. Gilgamesh abandons his throne and roams the earth, seeking Utnapishtim, the only mortal granted eternal life. The journey strips him bare. He fights lions, crosses the waters of death, and pleads with Utnapishtim to reveal his secret. The answer is a gut punch. Immortality isn't a prize to be won. Utnapishtim recounts surviving the Great Flood by building an ark, a story echoing Noah's but centuries older, and explains that his eternal life was a one-time gift. The gods offer Gilgamesh a test instead. Stay awake for 7 days. He fails instantly, succumbing to sleep, humanity's oldest weakness. Even the plant of rejuvenation he later finds is stolen by a serpent, leaving him empty-handed. The epic's genius lies in its refusal to soften the blow. Gilgamesh returns to Uruk not with eternal life, but with something subtler, wisdom. The city's towering walls, once symbols of his pride, become his legacy. He carves their story into stone, accepting that mortality gives life its weight. The flood parallels in Genesis aren't coincidental. They're evidence of how myths migrate, adapting to new cultures while preserving their core. But Gilgamesh's tale cuts deeper than shared motifs. It's about the first hero to stare into the abyss of his own finitude and still choose to build, to create, to leave marks that outlast flesh. Modern echoes of Gilgamesh are everywhere. The frenzied pursuit of anti-aging science mirrors his hunt for the magic plant. Superhero narratives, from Wolverine's agelessness to Batman's grief-fueled crusade, inherit his struggle against time. Even the arc of the Lord of the Rings, Frodo's loss of innocence, Aragorn's acceptance of mortality, whispers Gilgamesh's name. What makes this 4,000-year-old story endure isn't its fantastical monsters or divine interventions. It's the raw, ugly, beautiful truth at its center, that being human means loving deeply, losing terribly, and still finding the courage to etch your name into the world before the tide washes it away. Gilgamesh's grief for Enkidu isn't just sorrow. It's an earthquake that reshapes his soul. When he clutches his friend's lifeless body, refusing to let go until maggots crawl from the nostrils, the epic doesn't flinch from the grotesque intimacy of loss. This isn't the ceremonial mourning of a king. It's the raw, animal wailing of a man who's just discovered his own fragility. He tears his hair, strips his robes, and wanders the wilderness like a beast howling to the stars. For the first time, the invincible Gilgamesh understands what every mortal knows in their bones. Love is the knife that carves us open, and death is the hand that turns it. What follows is more than a quest, it's a psychological unraveling. His journey to Utnapishtim isn't just about cheating death, it's a desperate attempt to undo the unthinkable. Every step through the dark mountain tunnel, every battle with lions, is a frantic bargaining with the universe. If I can just reach the edge of the world, he thinks, I can wrestle back what was stolen. But the epic strips him bare. Utnapishtim's story of the flood, a cataclysm that wiped clean the slate of humanity, only underscores the futility. The gods spared one man, but even he lives with the weight of memory. Immortality, Gilgamesh learns, isn't escape, it's another kind of prison. The test of staying awake for 7 days is the cruelest joke of all. Gilgamesh, who once fought demons without breaking sweat, can't conquer something as simple as sleep. His failure is achingly human. We've all been there, eyes heavy with exhaustion, fighting to keep them open, only to slip under despite our best efforts. In that moment, the demigod becomes every insomniac, every grieving child, every soul who's ever begged the night for one more hour with what they've lost. Even the serpent steals more than a plant, it steals certainty. When the creature slithers away with his last hope, Gilgamesh doesn't rage, he sits by the water and weeps. That stillness is the epic's quiet masterstroke. After battles and bravado, the hero's greatest act is surrender. He returns to Uruk not with answers, but with a question etched into the city's walls. How do we live knowing we'll end? The poem doesn't offer platitudes. Instead, it shows Gilgamesh tracing his fingers over the bricks, each one a testament to what hands can build in borrowed time. Modern psychology would call this post-traumatic growth. Gilgamesh's arc mirrors our own struggles with loss, the bargaining, the rage, the hollow acceptance. The epic endures because it's the first story to map the wilderness of grief without promising a way out. When Achilles laments Patroclus or Thor screams over Loki's body, they're walking paths Gilgamesh carved 4,000 years ago. Even today's zombies and vampires, those desperate metaphors for cheating death, are just echoes of his torment. But here's the twist: the epic's power isn't in its despair, it's in what rises from it. Gilgamesh doesn't transcend mortality, he becomes its scribe. By recording his story, he does what we all try to do with photographs, journals, or children's names: etch a line in time that says I was here. The walls of Uruk still stand in ruins, whispering that the oldest human magic isn't living forever, it's making sure something does. Theseus didn't just enter the labyrinth, he walked into the belly of a cultural nightmare. The Minotaur wasn't merely a monster, it was a living symbol of Athens' subjugation to Crete. Every 9 years, 7 Athenian youths and 7 maidens were sent as tribute to King Minos, forced into the labyrinth to be devoured by the beast. This wasn't random brutality, it was political theater, a grim reminder of Minoan dominance over the Aegean. When Theseus volunteered to join the sacrificial group, he wasn't just seeking glory. He was challenging an empire. Ariadne's thread changed everything. The princess of Crete, daughter of Minos, defied her own bloodline to hand Theseus a ball of crimson yarn. On the surface, it's a simple tool: unspool it to mark your path, retrace your steps to escape, but dig deeper, and the thread becomes something revolutionary. In a world where the labyrinth represented the inescapable grip of Minoan power, Ariadne's gift was an act of sabotage. She didn't just give Theseus a way out, she gave Athens a blueprint for resistance. The myth transforms here from a monster hunt to a rebellion, where love and betrayal intertwine like the corridors of the maze itself. The Minotaur's death is shockingly intimate. Theseus doesn't battle the beast in a grand arena, he corners it in the labyrinth's heart, a claustrophobic space where every snort of the creature echoes off the walls. No sword is mentioned in the earliest versions. Some accounts say he strangled it bare-handed, others that he used the very knife intended to slit the Athenian sacrifices' throats. The killing isn't just victory, it's poetic justice, turning Crete's tools of oppression against itself. But the myth's brilliance lies in what happens after. Theseus' escape should be triumphant, yet the story takes a darker turn. He abandons Ariadne on Naxos, an act later writers spin as divine intervention or forgetfulness. Homer's Odyssey suggests she's killed by Artemis. Other versions have Dionysus claim her as his bride. The messy aftermath hints at an uncomfortable truth: liberation often leaves collateral damage. Athens may have broken free of Crete's shadow, but Ariadne, the architect of its freedom, becomes a footnote in Theseus' legend. The labyrinth's legacy outlasts its stones. Archaeologists have long debated whether the myth reflects real Minoan structures. The sprawling palace of Knossos, with its winding corridors, feels like a maze stripped of myth. Frescoes of bull-leaping rituals suggest the Minotaur might distill cultural memory of Crete's dangerous spectacles. For Athens, the story became propaganda, proof of their ascendance over a once dominant civilization. But the myth's enduring power isn't in its politics, it's in the primal fear it taps. The labyrinth is every impossible problem, every seemingly inescapable trap. Ariadne's thread is the flash of insight that guides us through, the courage to retrace our steps when we're lost. Modern retellings can't resist twisting the tale. Mary Renault's The King Must Die reimagines Theseus as a Bronze Age revolutionary, while The Hunger Games echoes the tributes sent to the Minotaur with its own grim lottery. Even the word labyrinth has seeped into psychology, describing the twists of memory or grief. What makes this myth timeless isn't the monster's roar. It's the quiet unraveling of the thread, the fragile line between being devoured and finding your way home. Theseus' triumph over the Minotaur should have cemented his place among Greece's greatest heroes, but the man who walked out of the labyrinth wasn't the same one who entered. Power, it seemed, corrupted even the noblest of hearts. His abduction of young Helen years before she'd become the face that launched 1,000 ships revealed a startling darkness. Though just a child at the time, Helen of Sparta was already famed for her beauty, and Theseus, drunk on his own legend, decided she should be his. With his friend Pirithous, he snatched her from her homeland, hiding her in his mother's village while he plotted to claim her as his bride once she came of age. This wasn't heroic courtship, it was calculated kidnapping, the act of a man who'd begun to believe the world existed for his taking. The gods, however, had other plans. Helen's brothers Castor and Pollux stormed Athens, rescuing their sister while Theseus was away on another reckless venture, this time attempting to help Pirithous kidnap Persephone from the underworld. The sheer audacity of this scheme speaks volumes. Theseus, who'd once symbolized Athenian justice, now thought himself equal to Hades, bargaining with the Lord of the Dead as if death itself were just another labyrinth to conquer. The result, both men were trapped in the underworld until Hercules eventually freed Theseus, leaving Pirithous to eternal punishment. The message was clear: even heroes have lines they cannot cross. Then there's Ariadne, the woman without whom Theseus would have been just another set of bones in the labyrinth. Ancient sources can't agree whether he abandoned her deliberately on Naxos or if Dionysus stole her away, but the stain remained. In some versions, Theseus sails off while she sleeps, her thread still clutched in his hand. In others, he's forced to leave her by divine intervention. Either way, the girl who defied a king and saved Athens became collateral damage in Theseus' legend. Later Athenian storytellers tried to sanitize this, painting Ariadne as happier with Dionysus, but the bitterness lingers. A hero's gratitude, it seems, had an expiration date. His homecoming sealed his tragic arc. Theseus forgot to change his ship's black sails to white, the signal that he'd survived the labyrinth, and his father Aegeus, seeing the dark cloth on the horizon, threw himself into the sea that now bears his name. Theseus ruled Athens for decades, but his reign grew increasingly tyrannical. The man who'd once championed the common people became distant, even cruel, until his own subjects drove him into exile. He died not in glorious battle, but pushed off a cliff by King Lycomedes, a host who'd promised him sanctuary. The irony is brutal. History's great monster slayer became, in the end, the monster others needed to slay. What makes Theseus fascinating isn't his heroism, it's his humanity. Unlike Hercules, who suffers because of the gods' machinations, or Odysseus, whose flaws are tempered by wisdom, Theseus' downfall comes from within. Each bad decision is entirely his own, each betrayal a choice. The myths force us to confront an uncomfortable truth. The same qualities that make someone a hero, boldness, ambition, self-confidence, can curdle into arrogance and cruelty when left unchecked. Modern storytellers can't resist exploring this duality. Rick Riordan's Percy Jackson series paints Theseus as a has-been glory hound, while the king must die imagines him as a flawed revolutionary. Even Batman, the brooding hero of Gotham, echoes Theseus' arc when power isolates him from those he loves. Theseus isn't a cautionary tale about villains, he's a warning about heroes who forget why they began their journeys. The labyrinth didn't end at the Minotaur's corpse, it wound through his entire life, and in the end, even the great Theseus couldn't find his way out. Perseus wasn't given a hero's welcome at birth, he was tossed into the sea in a wooden chest, left to drown by a grandfather terrified of prophecy. But destiny has a way of washing its chosen back ashore. Raised by a humble fisherman, the boy grew into a man with a god's blood in his veins and a king's ultimatum hanging over his head: bring back the head of Medusa or lose his mother to a tyrant's unwanted advances. The gods, never ones to resist a good cosmic game, armed him for the impossible. Hermes lent winged sandals to outrun the Gorgon's curse, while Athena offered her bronze shield, not as a weapon but as a mirror. Because facing Medusa directly meant turning to stone, her power wasn't in her fangs or serpent hair, but in the unbearable truth of her gaze. Medusa's story twists deeper than her snakes. Once a beautiful priestess of Athena, she was violated by Poseidon in the goddess's own temple, a crime for which she was punished, transformed into a monster. Athena's gift to Perseus feels like divine guilt, a way to clean up the mess the gods created. The shield becomes a metaphor to defeat trauma. You can't face it head-on. You have to approach it sideways, reflect on it, turn its own weight against itself. When Perseus beheads Medusa, her severed neck births Pegasus, the winged horse, a stark symbol of how brutality and beauty often share the same root. But the ordeal wasn't over. On his return, Perseus spotted Andromeda chained to a cliff, a sacrifice to a sea monster sent by Poseidon, another of the gods' collateral damages. Using Medusa's head like a weapon of mass petrification, he turned the beast to stone mid-lunge, rescuing Andromeda not through brute force, but with the very curse he'd been sent to exploit. The irony is thick enough to carve. The monster Medusa in death saves more lives than she ever took. Perseus's legacy wasn't just in the monsters he slew, but in the lineage he built. His founding of Mycenae, the city that would later birth Agamemnon, tied his story to the Trojan War's fury. Yet the myth lingers not on his kingship, but on the objects he carried: the harp sword, the invisibility helm, the head in a bag. These talismans whisper an uncomfortable truth: no hero succeeds alone. Even demigods need hand-me-down miracles. Modern tellings can't resist unraveling Medusa's side of the tale. Feminist reclamations paint her as a victim, her monstrousness a shield against further violation. Percy Jackson reimagines her as a tragic figure, offering warnings instead of curses. And in Clash of the Titans, whether the campy 80s version or the CGI-heavy remake, the focus always circles back to that shield. Because Perseus's victory wasn't about strength, it was about seeing differently. Sometimes the deadliest truths can only be faced in reflection. Medusa's snaked head was never just a trophy. It was a mirror reflecting society's deepest fears about women's power. For centuries, her image adorned shields and temple pediments as a protective apotropaic symbol, warding off evil with the threat of petrification. But somewhere between ancient Greece and modern feminism, the Gorgon underwent a metamorphosis far more radical than Athena's curse. What was once a monstrous cautionary tale became a rallying cry for survivors, her story reinterpreted through lenses Ovid never could have imagined. The shift began with second-wave feminists in the 1970s, who saw Medusa's transformation not as divine punishment, but as a weapon forged from trauma. Artist Judy Chicago placed her alongside historical female figures in the dinner party, her ceramic face shedding tears of recognition. Poet Helene Sixus reclaimed the Gorgon's gaze in the laugh of the Medusa, urging women to stop averting their eyes. You only have to look at the Medusa straight on to see her. And she's not deadly, she's beautiful and she's laughing. This wasn't just revisionism, it was resurrection, pulling Medusa from the rubble of patriarchal storytelling and dusting off her true form. Contemporary art amplifies this reclamation. Puerto Rican artist Lydia Rubio's Medusa series depicts her not with serpents but with lush tropical flowers, a defiant celebration of femininity that refuses to be monstrous. Meanwhile, the viral Medusa tattoo project invites survivors of sexual assault to ink her image as armor, turning the myth into solidarity. Even fashion has joined the chorus. Versace's iconic logo, once a symbol of dangerous allure, now carries whispers of matriarchal resistance on runway models and protest signs alike. Literature twists the knife deeper. Madeline Miller's Circe reframes Medusa's encounter with Perseus as a moment of tragic recognition between outcasts. Natalie Haynes' Stone-Blind fractures the hero narrative entirely, painting Perseus as a bumbling pawn while Medusa's final thoughts pity the boy who thinks he has no choice. These retellings expose the scaffolding of the original myth, how easily monster slots over victim when the storytellers hold all the pens. The most provocative reinterpretations come from trauma theory. Psychologists liken Medusa's petrifying gaze to the freeze response of assault survivors, her stone-making power a metaphor for how violence can immobilize its victims. The snake's hypervigilance made flesh coiled and ready to strike. When contemporary activists plaster her face on #MeToo protest signs, they're not just invoking a symbol, they're rewriting her curse as a shield. Perhaps the most radical truth lies in Medusa's ancient roots. Some scholars argue she predates Greek mythology entirely, tracing her origins to Libyan serpent goddesses worshipped as protectresses. If true, then Athena's punishment was never the beginning, just another layer of patriarchal paint over something far older and wilder. Today's reclamations then aren't corrections. They're homecomings. The Gorgon's eyes may still turn men to stone, but now at last she gets to choose her targets. Jason didn't set sail for the Golden Fleece alone. He assembled Greece's greatest heroes for the first true team adventure in myth. The Argo's crew reads like a who's who of legendary figures: Hercules, still mourning Hylas; Orpheus, whose music would one day charm the underworld; even the winged Boreads who could outrun the wind. But here's the twist: this all-star roster wasn't the key to their success. What made the Argonauts extraordinary wasn't their individual powers, but how those talents intertwined. When the clashing rocks threatened to crush their ship, it wasn't brute strength that saved them, it was the swiftness of the Boreads combined with Athena's guidance, a perfect dance of mortal and divine collaboration. The fleece itself hung like a beacon of corrupted kingship. Guarded by a dragon in Colchis, it symbolized the rightful rule Jason's uncle Peleus had stolen. But obtaining it required more than bravery, it demanded moral compromise. Enter Medea, princess and sorceress, whose knowledge of potions and poisons made her more valuable than any sword. Her love for Jason, sparked by Eros' arrow, became the crew's greatest weapon and eventual undoing. With her help, Jason yoked fire-breathing bulls, sowed dragon's teeth that sprouted into warriors, and finally drugged the guardian serpent. Yet the myth lingers not on these feats, but on the price paid. Medea betrayed her father, murdered her brother to slow pursuit, and stained the Argo's return voyage with familial blood. What begins as a heroic quest unravels into a cautionary tale about ends justifying means. Jason's triumphant homecoming rings hollow when Peleus meets a gruesome end boiled alive by Medea's magic disguised as rejuvenation. The fleece restores Jason's throne, but the victory tastes like ashes. Later poets compound this darkness when Jason abandons Medea for a politically advantageous marriage, triggering her infamous infanticidal revenge. Euripides' tragedy doesn't paint her as a monster, but as a woman scorned, howling at the universe. What good was my loyalty when your oaths were just wine? Modern interpretations grapple with this moral murkiness. The 1963 Jason and the Argonauts film, with its legendary stop-motion skeletons, sanitizes the story into pure adventure. But Rick Riordan's Heroes of Olympus series digs into the trauma, showing Medea centuries later, still running magic shops and nursing her wrath. Even scientific vessels like the space probe Argo carry the myth's duality, named for teamwork's potential, yet evoking the collateral damage left in the fleece's wake. The Argonauts' true legacy isn't in gold or glory, but in the blueprint they created. Every heist movie ensemble, every superhero team-up, every Ocean's 11-style caper owes a debt to that first shipload of misfits. But the myth whispers a warning louder than any siren. Talent without integrity builds castles on quicksand. Jason survives his adventures but ends his days a broken man, crushed by the rotting hull of the Argo, the very vessel that once carried his dreams. Some quests, it seems, leave deeper scars than the monsters ever could. Euripides didn't just write a tragedy, he tore open the hero's myth and showed us the blood inside. When Medea stands in her Corinthian courtyard, gripping the knife, her children's laughter still echoing in the halls, the play shatters any comfortable notions of justice or revenge. This isn't the neat punishment of a villain, it's the unraveling of a woman pushed to the edge of the world's cruelty. Jason's betrayal isn't just personal, it's systemic. He discards Medea, the foreigner who sacrificed everything for him, to marry a princess and secure his political future. And in that moment, Euripides forces us to ask, when a hero becomes the villain, what weapons are left to the powerless? Medea's infanticide isn't senseless brutality, it's calculated devastation. She doesn't kill in blind rage, but with chilling precision, understanding that murdering their sons is the only way to truly destroy Jason. No battlefield glory, no honorable duel, just the gutted howl of a man who's lost his legacy. The play's genius lies in its unbearable duality. We recoil at Medea's act, yet the chorus of Corinthian women, though horrified, doesn't condemn her. They sing of the injustices she's endured. The tide of tears has overflowed. Too long / the silent woman has been slighted. Euripides holds up a mirror to Athens' own hypocrisy, where foreign wives had no rights and heroes like Jason could discard them like used weapons. The divine machinery grinds cruelly here. Medea escapes punishment not through remorse, but by her grandfather Helios's golden chariot, soaring away as Jason screams below. This isn't justice, it's cosmic mockery. The gods care nothing for mortal suffering, they only preserve their own bloodline. Jason, the once golden hero, is left broken, his dreams of dynasty reduced to small graves and silence. Modern adaptations wrestle painfully with this legacy. Pasolini's 1969 film frames Medea as a shamanistic figure, her violence a ritual against colonial oppression. Recent stagings cast her as an undocumented immigrant, her children's deaths a grotesque protest against erasure. Even Game of Thrones borrowed this arc with Cersei's wildfire massacre, another mother turning societal weapons back on their makers. What lingers isn't the blood, but the question Euripides plants like a knife in the floorboards. When the world gives women no peaceful path to justice, how far is too far to make it listen? The play offers no answers, only Medea's shadow against the sun, and the echo of children who'll never grow old enough to become their father. Sigurd didn't stumble upon the dragon Fafnir by accident. He was forged for that moment, steel and sinew shaped by betrayal. The Volsunga Saga, a Norse epic written on the edge of history and myth, tells of a boy raised in exile, his father murdered, his birthright stolen. When the smith Regin gifts him the shattered pieces of Gram, a sword once broken by the god Odin himself, Sigurd doesn't just reforge the blade, he tempers it with his own hunger for justice. The weapon becomes an extension of his will, sharp enough to split an anvil in half. But Gram's true test comes in the murk of Nitterheath, where Fafnir, once a man twisted by greed into a wingless worm, guards a cursed horde. Unlike Beowulf's dragon, a mindless force of nature, Fafnir speaks. His dying words drip with venom. The gold you crave will drown you. The battle isn't the climax, it's the preamble. Sigurd's real trial begins when he tastes the dragon's blood and gains the gift of prophecy, hearing the chatter of birds warning him of Regin's impending betrayal. He acts swiftly, beheading the smith before the knife can turn, but the curse clings. The treasure he claims includes Andvari's ring, a piece of the dragon's hoard that carries Loki's malice. Here, the saga diverges sharply from Beowulf's end. Both heroes slay dragons, but where Beowulf falls to his beast, his death a blaze of glory, Sigurd survives only to be undone by the gold he won. His fate is sealed not in battle, but in a web of love and vengeance, murdered in his sleep by those envious of his glory. Tolkien wove Sigurd's bones into The Hobbit. Bilbo's encounter with Smaug mirrors Sigurd's, the riddling conversation, the revelation of a weak spot, even the theft of a single cup that awakens the dragon's wrath. But Tolkien twists the ending. Where Sigurd succumbs to greed and treachery, Bilbo pockets the Arkenstone not for wealth but to broker peace. The ring he takes from Gollum, though, carries the same whisper of doom as Andvari's cursed band. Tolkien knew the old stories too well to let his hero escape entirely unscathed. What makes Sigurd's story endure isn't the dragon's death, it's the hollowness of the victory. The Volsunga saga refuses to let heroism exist in a vacuum. Slaying monsters is easy compared to navigating the human hearts left in their wake. Sigurd's tragedy is that he outthinks the beast, only to be outplayed by the very allies he trusted. His legacy lives on not in songs of triumph, but in the warning they carry. Some curses aren't broken by swords, they're sharpened by them. Wagner's ring cycle didn't just borrow from the Volsunga saga, it bent the myth to its own thunderous will. When the composer renamed Sigurd as Siegfried and wove him into his four-opera epic, he transformed the dragon slayer into a romantic icon, a pure-hearted hero undone by a world too corrupt to bear his light. The cursed ring Andvari forged becomes the Raingold, its malice magnified into an industrial-scale metaphor for capitalism's soul-crushing greed, Fafnir's hoard. Now it's the spoils of gods and giants, a cosmic tug-of-war where even the Valkyries aren't spared the fallout. Wagner's genius and his arrogance was in taking these Norse bones and grafting them to German nationalism, creating a mythos so potent it would echo through history for better and worse. Yet the ring cycle's most enduring twist lies in what it omits. Sigurd's prophetic wisdom, his ability to hear bird speech after tasting dragon's blood, gets sidelined. Instead, Wagner gives us Siegfried's fearlessness, a trait that feels heroic until it curdles into naivety. His Siegfried doesn't suspect betrayal because he can't conceive of deceit, a fatal flaw that makes his murder by Hagen all the more brutal. This reinterpretation rippled through modern fantasy. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, while critical of Wagner's ideology, couldn't escape the gravitational pull of that cursed ring. The One Ring's corrupting influence mirrors the Raingold's, but with a crucial difference. Where Wagner's heroes are doomed by fate, Tolkien's Frodo and Sam wrestle with choice, a subtle rebuttal to the ring cycle's deterministic gloom. Dragon hordes, too, evolved under Wagner's shadow. Before Siegfried, Fafnir's treasure was a personal damnation. Afterward, it became a symbol of systemic rot. Think Smaug's Mountain of Gold in The Hobbit, or Game of Thrones Viserion guarding the White Army's frozen vaults. These modern hordes aren't just wealth, they're seats of power, their allure so toxic they warp nations. Even Elden Ring's lore, with its dragon communion cults and cursed runes, owes a debt to Wagner's vision of corruption as an almost divine force. But the Volsunga saga's raw humanity still bleeds through the adaptations. When Sigurd unknowingly betrays Brynhild, another thread Wagner simplified into Brunhilde's fiery immolation. The original text lingers on her grief, not the pyrotechnics. Her suicide isn't spectacle, it's the shattering of a woman who loved too fiercely in a world that rewarded treachery. This complexity survives in characters like the witches Yennefer, whose morally grey choices echo Brynhild's rage, or Skyrim's Dragonborn, who inherits Sigurd's mantle only to face the same question: can you slay monsters without becoming one? The saga's true legacy isn't in the dragons or rings, but in its refusal to let heroes off the hook. Sigurd's story warns that no amount of strength or prophecy can inoculate you against betrayal, or the consequences of your own choices. Wagner may have draped the myth in orchestral grandeur, but the original whispers something far darker and more compelling. Even the brightest legends cast long shadows. And in those shadows we see ourselves. Rama's exile wasn't just a banishment, it was a masterclass in righteous endurance. When his stepmother Kaikai demanded her son Bharata inherit the throne instead, forcing Rama into 14 years of forest exile, the prince didn't rage or resist. He simply bowed, kissed his father's feet, and walked into the wilderness with his wife Sita and loyal brother Lakshmana. This moment crystallizes the Ramayana's core tenet: dharma, the sacred duty that outweighs personal desire. But the forest wasn't empty of peril. The demon king Ravana, a 10-headed ruler of Lanka with a weakness for beauty, caught wind of Sita's grace and hatched a plan. Disguising his henchman Maricha as a golden deer, he lured Rama away with its ethereal glow. Sita's fascination with the creature became the trap's trigger. When she heard Rama's cry, Maricha's mimicry, she begged Lakshmana to help, drawing protective lines around their hut before leaving. But Ravana, disguised as a holy mendicant, crossed that line the moment Sita stepped out to offer alms. Her abduction wasn't just a kidnapping, it was a violation of Maryada, the sacred boundaries of conduct. Enter Hanuman, the monkey god whose leap across the ocean to Lanka became the stuff of celestial legend. More than just a messenger, he was the bridge between divine will and mortal action. When he found Sita in Ravana's Ashoka Grove, her resolve unbroken despite months of coercion, he didn't just deliver Rama's ring, he set the stage for war. Hanuman's flight back to Rama, carrying not just news but hope, embodies bhakti, the devotion that fuels impossible feats. His tail, set aflame by Ravana's soldiers, became a torch that burned Lanka's arrogance to cinders long before Rama's arrows finished the job. The Ramayana's climax isn't just a battle, it's a cosmic realignment. Rama's victory over Ravana, aided by an army of monkeys and bears, restored balance not just to Ayodhya but to the moral universe. The Lakshmana Rekha, that fateful line Sita crossed, became a cultural shorthand for boundaries and their consequences, but the story's true genius lies in its aftermath. Rama's demand that Sita prove her purity through fire, a test she passes but which stains his triumph, introduces heart-wrenching complexity. Their eventual separation, driven by courtly gossip, forces a reckoning. Even the holiest heroes are flawed, and justice doesn't always wear a kind face. Diwali, the festival of lights, immortalizes this homecoming. The lamps that illuminate homes aren't just celebrations, they're echoes of Ayodhya's oil lamps guiding Rama back after exile. The Ramayana's influence stretches further. It's recited in Hindu households for blessings, adapted into Thai Ramakien and Indonesian Kakawin, even reframed by feminists who question Sita's silent suffering. Every retelling, from Tulsida's devotional Ramcharitmanas to modern graphic novels, asks the same timeless question: what price must goodness pay to walk in a world where demons wear crowns? The answer flickers in every Diwali lamp, a reminder that light, no matter how distant, always returns. The moment Sita stepped into the flames, the Ramayana's moral universe shuddered. Rama's demand for the Agni Pariksha, the fire ordeal to prove his wife's purity after her captivity in Lanka, wasn't just a test of her virtue but a crack in his own divine pedestal. The flames, he insisted, wouldn't touch her if she'd remained faithful, and they didn't, but the fire did something far more revealing. It exposed the fragility of a hero's trust and the unbearable weight placed on women to carry the burden of proof. Sita emerged unscathed, yet the embers of that moment would spark debates for millennia. Was this a triumphant vindication or a grotesque betrayal? Feminist scholars dissect the scene with razor precision. The ancient text frames Sita's ordeal as divine theatre. Agni, the fire god himself, declares her innocence, restoring her honor. But look closer and the subtext scolds. Rama, the paragon of Maryada moral boundaries, hesitates to take back a queen his subjects might gossip about. His love, it seems, bows to public opinion. Modern retellings like Volga's The Liberation of Sita reimagine her walking away after the fire, refusing to be twice judged, first by Ravana, then by her husband. South Asian feminists invoke her when confronting honor culture, where women's bodies become battlegrounds for male reputations, yet the story's cultural hold resists simple condemnation. In many devotional traditions, Sita's ordeal isn't read as subjugation but as Shakti, the goddess's invincibility. When she chooses to descend into the earth rather than endure another trial, it's not defeat, it's sovereignty. She returns to her mother, Bhumi the earth, on her own terms. Folk songs from Uttar Pradesh to Bali paint her as the unbroken force behind Rama's righteousness, the silent architect of his victories. The Agni Pariksha echoes beyond myth. Bollywood's Sita sings the blues, turns her plight into a jazz-age lament, while Tamil activist performances stage her trial as a courtroom drama with Ravana's lawyers arguing she was never tainted at all. Even the Lakshmana Rekha, that fatal boundary line, gets flipped in feminist retellings, not a cage but a warning about how society polices women's movement. The fire's true lesson might lie in its duality. It purified Sita in the eyes of the epic, yes, but it also scorched a question into collective memory. Why must the purest love demand proof? The flames spared Sita's body, but they branded the story with a tension that still smolders. Devotion and defiance can wear the same face, and sometimes the earth itself opens to offer sanctuary. Sun Wukong wasn't born a hero, he erupted into existence from a stone egg atop the mountain of flowers and fruit, his first act of defiance against the natural order. This monkey king, with his fiery eyes and golden fur, didn't bow to heaven or earth. He carved his own path, mastering magic, martial arts, and immortality before storming the heavens themselves. His weapon, the Rui Jingu Bang, wasn't just a staff, it was a cosmic joke. Originally a pillar propping up the underwater palace of the Dragon King, it shrank or stretched to his whim, a symbol of his refusal to be bound by anyone's rules. When the gods tried to placate him with the empty title of Great Sage Equal to Heaven, Sun Wukong saw through their condescension and unleashed chaos, eating the peaches of immortality, drinking the Jade Emperor's wine, and scribbling his name across the celestial bureaucracy like graffiti. His rebellion wasn't just mischief, it was a theological thunderclap. Journey to the West, the Ming Dynasty epic that immortalized his story, frames this rampage as the clash between raw, untamed potential and rigid divine order. The Buddha himself finally intervenes, not with violence but with a lesson. He bets Sun Wukong he can't leap out of his palm, and when the Monkey King somersaults to the edge of the universe, he finds 5 pillars marking his limit. Only when he realizes they're Buddha's fingers does he understand. True freedom isn't in defiance, but in mastering the self. This moment of humility lands him under 5 Elements Mountain, where he stews for 5 centuries until Guanyin, the Bodhisattva of mercy, offers redemption through service. Enter Tripitaka, the monk tasked with fetching sacred Buddhist scriptures from India. Sun Wukong's journey as his protector reframes his rebellion as spiritual growth. Every demon they face, from the bone-white Lady White Snake to the Bull Demon King, is a mirror of his past arrogance. Even his golden headband, which tightens when he disobeys, isn't just restraint. It's a Buddhist metaphor for the discipline needed to harness one's nature. The staff that once toppled heaven now clears paths through illusion, its weight a reminder that power must serve purpose. Modern retellings can't resist his anarchic charm. Dragon Ball's Goku lifts Sun Wukong's tail and staff, turning enlightenment into training arcs. The Forbidden Kingdom pits him against jaded warriors in a love letter to Wuxia. Even League of Legends, Wukong channels his trickster spirit, but the original's genius lies in its balance, a hero who's both divine menace and comic relief. His journey a swirling allegory of ego, obedience, and the hard-won wisdom that even the mightiest must bend, not to gods but to the truth that no one leaps beyond their own shadow. Sun Wukong's leap from Ming Dynasty literature to global icon wasn't just a journey, it was a cultural supernova. When Dragon Ball creator Akira Toriyama reimagined him as Goku in 1984, he kept the monkey tail and staff but swapped Taoist enlightenment for alien Saiyan bloodlines. The genius of this adaptation, it distilled Sun Wukong's essence, his rebellious spirit, bottomless appetite, and relentless growth into a shonen protagonist who'd redefine anime. Goku's Kinto, unflying nimbus cloud and extending power pole were direct homages, but the deeper connection was philosophical. Both characters start as forces of chaos, their power outstripping their wisdom, only to mature through trials that temper strength with compassion. The difference, where Sun Wukong's arc culminates in Buddhahood, Goku's never-ending quest for stronger opponents mirrors modern capitalism's obsession with limitless progress. Western audiences got their own twist with Lego Monkey Kid, a 2020 series that mashed Chinese mythology with brick-based whimsy. Here, Sun Wukong mentors a teenage hero, reframing the Monkey King's trickster antics as teachable moments. The show's vibrant aesthetic, floating lanterns, neon-lit mechas bridges ancient folklore and cyberpunk, proving his story thrives in any aesthetic. Even the headband gets a reboot. Instead of a pain-inducing restraint, it's a holographic interface transforming punishment into partnership. Video games couldn't resist his gravitational pull either. League of Legends, Wukong spins his staff into cyclones, while Smite pits him as a jungler who clones himself, a nod to his 72 transformations. But Black Myth, Wukong, an upcoming action RPG, dives deepest into the mythos. Trailers show him battling deities with combat so fluid it mirrors Journey to the West's description of his cloud somersault agility. The game's most striking detail, blood drips from his golden headband, hinting at the cost of his celestial rebellion. Why does a 16th century monkey resonate in VR chats and TikTok dances? Because Sun Wukong is the ultimate underdog who outsmarts the system. His appeal crosses borders. He's Anansi the spider with a staff, Loki with a moral compass. Modern retellings latch onto his duality. He's both divine and feral, sacred and subversive. When American-born Chinese reimagines him as a high schooler navigating identity, or when the Monkey King Netflix film gives him Michelle Yeoh's voice, they're tapping into the same truth that made pilgrims chant his adventures for centuries. True freedom isn't in breaking rules but rewriting them entirely. Ku Chulain's battle frenzy wasn't just strength, it was a force of nature that twisted his body into something monstrous. The Irish called it ryostrad, the warp spasm, bones cracking, muscles contorting, one eye sucking into his skull while the other bulged grotesquely. His hair stood erect like bloody spikes, and a luminous halo of heat rippled around him, boiling the very air. This wasn't a warrior's discipline. It was primal fury incarnate, a side effect of his divine lineage as the son of the sun god Lug. The Ulster cycle doesn't glorify these transformations, it paints them with visceral horror. When roused, Ku Chulain couldn't distinguish friend from foe. His own allies had to douse him in vats of cold water to snap him back to sanity, the steam hissing like a sword pulled from the forge. His most infamous rampage came during the Tain Bo Cuelge, the cattle raid of Cooley. Alone, he held off Queen Medibi's entire army, using the landscape itself as a weapon. He fought from river fords, forcing enemies into bottlenecks where his fury could maximize carnage. At one point, he slew so many men that their corpses formed a makeshift dam, redirecting the river's flow. The text lingers on the gore, spears lodged in skulls, severed hands still clutching weapons, not to titillate, but to underscore the cost of such power. Celtic culture revered martial prowess, but Ku Chulain's spasm was a cautionary spectre. Uncontrolled violence consumes even the wielder. Yet for all his battlefield terror, his deepest wounds came from love. His tragic bond with Ferdiad, his foster brother and equal in combat, culminated in a 3-day duel where they traded blows and poetry in equal measure. When Ku Chulain finally landed the killing spear thrust, he cradled Ferdiad as he died, howling grief into the dawn. Later, his wife Ymir's warnings about his arrogance went unheeded, sealing his doom. The myths refuse to let him be a mere killing machine. They force him to grapple with the emotional wreckage left in his wake. The Ulster cycle's genius lies in its refusal to sanitize heroism. Cu Chulain's final stand, mortally wounded yet tying himself to a standing stone so he could die on his feet, his enemies too terrified to approach until a raven lands on his shoulder, isn't triumphant. It's a raw portrait of a man whose greatness and flaws were inseparable. Modern parallels abound: Wolverine's berserker rage, the Hulk's uncontrollable transformations, even Game of Thrones berserkers. But Cu Chulain's story cuts deeper because it asks what happens when the battle ends, and the hero must live with the monstrous weight of his own legend. Cu Chulain's final moments weren't spent charging into battle, they were a slow, deliberate defiance of death itself. Mortally wounded by Lugaid's enchanted spear, his intestines spilled onto the ground, yet he refused to fall. Gathering his last strength, he staggered to a standing stone and bound himself to it with his own belt, ensuring he'd meet his end upright, his sword still clutched in hand. The image is haunting: a hero turned monolith, his body rigid as the rock he leaned against, his enemies too terrified to approach until a crow landed on his shoulder, the ultimate sign of life's departure. This wasn't just a warrior's death, it was a statement. Even in ruin, Cu Chulain would not be conquered. The trope of the bound hero echoes across cultures, each iteration revealing something raw about the human condition. Samson, the biblical strongman, shares eerie parallels. Blinded and chained to the pillars of a Philistine temple, he regained his strength one final time to bring the structure crashing down, trading his life for vengeance. Both heroes use their last act to weaponize their bodies against oppression, transforming their collapse into a spectacle of resistance. But where Samson's end is explosive, Cu Chulain's is glacial, a silent battle against gravity itself. The stone isn't just a prop, it's a witness. Celtic lore revered standing stones as conduits between worlds, making his choice to fuse with one a sacred act, a merging of mortal flesh with eternal earth. Dig deeper and the differences carve out cultural fingerprints. Samson's power was divine loan, revoked the moment his hair was shorn. His bound state symbolized broken covenant. Cu Chulain's binding, though, was self-inflicted, an assertion of agency even in dissolution. The Morrigan, the crow goddess who both loved and doomed him, perched on his shoulder not as a thief of strength but as a psychopomp guiding his spirit to the otherworld. This nuance matters. In Judeo-Christian tradition, Samson's death is punitive, a lesson in humility. In the Ulster cycle, Cu Chulain's is transcendent, a reminder that some debts of honor outlast the breath that carries them. Modern echoes of the bound hero persist, from Boromir's last stand in The Lord of the Rings, arrows peppering his body as he clings to a tree, to Gladiator's Maximus, whose final vision of wheat fields mirrors Cu Chulain's otherworld journey. Even Game of Thrones borrowed the motif when Ned Stark's greatsword was wedged into stone after his execution, a silent protest carved in steel. What binds these myths isn't just the act of tying oneself to something immovable, but the unspoken truth beneath it. Heroes aren't measured by how they live, but by what they refuse to let go of when dying. For Cu Chulain, it wasn't pride or rage. It was the sheer, stubborn insistence that a warrior's posture outlasts his pulse.